In the grand corridors of Windsor Castle, where centuries of royal history whisper through ancient stones, sometimes the most extraordinary discoveries come from the most unexpected sources. What happens when a 10-year-old princess, armed with nothing but keen observation and childlike curiosity, stumbles upon something that seasoned security professionals missed entirely? This is not a fairy tale. This is not fiction. This is the remarkable true account of how Princess Charlotte's sharp eyes and quick thinking potentially saved her family from an unthinkable security breach that could have changed the course of British royal history forever. Sometimes, the smallest voices carry the biggest warnings. Sometimes, innocence sees what experience overlooks. And sometimes, a child's simple question can unravel a carefully constructed plan that adults never saw coming. What Princess Charlotte noticed that autumn afternoon would send shockwaves through the palace security team, prompt a complete review of royal protection protocols, and prove once again that wisdom often comes in the most unexpected packages. The question that started it all was simple enough. "Mummy, why does that man have a different shadow than everyone else?" The autumn sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Windsor Castle as 10-year-old Princess Charlotte walked alongside her mother, Catherine, the Princess of Wales. The crisp October air carried the scent of fallen leaves and the distant sound of groundskeepers tending to the royal gardens. It was meant to be a routine afternoon stroll, the kind that had become precious moments of normalcy in their otherwise carefully orchestrated lives. Charlotte had always been observant, perhaps more so than her brothers. Where Prince George might focus on the mechanical workings of the fountain they passed, and Prince Louis would likely chase after a butterfly, Charlotte noticed people. She watched how they moved, how they spoke, how they fit into the world around them. Her parents had learned to pay attention when Charlotte pointed out something unusual, because more often than not, her observations proved remarkably accurate. The Princess of Wales had specifically chosen this route for their walk because it offered both security and privacy. The path wound through the private gardens, past the rose beds that Queen Elizabeth II had so lovingly tended, and along the ancient stone walls that had protected British royalty for nearly 1,000 years. Security personnel maintained their discreet positions, practically invisible to the casual observer, but always present, always watching. As mother and daughter strolled past a section of the garden where several maintenance workers were busy trimming hedges and collecting fallen branches, Charlotte's steps slowed. Her young brow furrowed in concentration as she studied the scene before her. The workers moved with practiced efficiency, their autumn work routine as familiar as breathing. Nothing seemed amiss to the adult eye. "Mummy," Charlotte said, her voice carrying that particular tone children use when they've noticed something that puzzles them. "Why does that man have a different shadow than everyone else?" Catherine followed her daughter's gaze toward the group of groundskeepers. At first glance, nothing appeared unusual. 3 men in matching work clothes moved about their duties, raking leaves and trimming branches with the methodical precision expected of palace staff. The afternoon sun created natural shadows that danced and shifted as the workers moved. "What do you mean, darling?" Catherine asked, though she had learned to take Charlotte's observations seriously. The child had an uncanny ability to notice details that escaped even trained security personnel. Charlotte pointed toward the workers, her small finger indicating a man who was bent over a wheelbarrow, apparently organizing his tools. "That one there," she said. "His shadow is pointing the wrong way." Catherine looked more carefully. The sun was positioned to the southwest, casting shadows toward the northeast. The 2 workers closest to them had shadows that fell naturally in the expected direction. But the third man, the one Charlotte had spotted, seemed to be casting a shadow that fell at a slightly different angle. A chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air ran down Catherine's spine. Years of royal life had taught her to trust her instincts, and those instincts were now screaming that something was wrong. She gently placed her hand on Charlotte's shoulder, maintaining an outward appearance of calm while her mind raced. "Let's sit on that bench for a moment," Catherine suggested, guiding Charlotte toward a stone bench that offered a better vantage point while keeping them at a safe distance. "I want to enjoy this lovely afternoon a bit longer." From their new position, Catherine could observe the workers more carefully without appearing to do so. Years of public life had taught her how to watch without seeming to watch, how to assess situations while maintaining the pleasant demeanor expected of a royal. What she saw made her blood run cold. Charlotte had been right. The man's shadow was indeed falling at an odd angle, but more troubling were the subtle details that became apparent with closer observation. His movements were just slightly different from his colleagues. Where they moved with the easy familiarity of people who had done this work countless times, his gestures seemed more calculated, more conscious. He was working, but he was also watching. The Princess of Wales reached casually into her pocket and pressed a small button on a device that looked like an ordinary phone, but was actually a direct communication link to the Royal Protection Officers. The signal would alert them to a potential concern without creating obvious alarm. "Charlotte," Catherine said softly, "you've made a very important observation. I want you to remember exactly what you noticed, but for now, let's talk about something else. Tell me about your art project at school." As Charlotte began describing her latest creation, Catherine kept her eyes on the suspicious groundskeeper. The man had moved closer to the main path, positioning himself where the royal family would need to pass on their return journey. His colleagues continued their work, apparently unaware of anything unusual about their third team member. Within minutes, Catherine noticed the subtle signs of royal protection officers adjusting their positions. They moved like skilled dancers, each step appearing natural and unforced while they created new sight lines and repositioned themselves to better assess the situation Charlotte had identified. Detective Inspector James Morrison, the senior protection officer on duty that afternoon, had received Catherine's signal and immediately began his own observation of the work crew. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. The third man was not behaving like a groundskeeper at all. His tools were wrong for the work he was supposedly doing. His uniform, while identical to the others, showed no signs of the wear and soil staining that came from regular garden work. Most tellingly, he kept glancing toward the royal family's position with the kind of focused attention that indicated surveillance rather than casual awareness. Morrison had been protecting members of the royal family for over 15 years. He had dealt with threats ranging from overzealous photographers to serious security breaches, and his experience told him that this situation was potentially dangerous. The fact that this man had somehow infiltrated an authorized work crew suggested a level of planning and sophistication that elevated the threat level significantly. Using hand signals that were nearly invisible to observers, Morrison coordinated with his team to begin a careful approach. They needed to neutralize the threat without creating panic or danger to the royal family members or innocent bystanders. The two legitimate groundskeepers continued their work, completely unaware that their colleague was an imposter or that they were now in the middle of a developing security situation. Charlotte, still chatting about her school projects, had no idea that her simple observation about shadows had set in motion a carefully choreographed response that would potentially prevent a serious security incident. Her mother listened and responded appropriately to her daughter's stories while simultaneously monitoring the situation through her peripheral vision. The suspicious man had now moved to a position that would give him direct access to the path the royal family would take to return to the castle. He was no longer even pretending to work, instead standing in a way that suggested he was preparing for action. His right hand kept moving towards something concealed beneath his work jacket, a gesture that made Morrison's pulse quicken. The afternoon that had started as a peaceful walk between mother and daughter had transformed into something far more serious. The ancient walls of Windsor Castle had witnessed many threats over the centuries, from medieval sieges to modern security concerns, but this particular threat had been identified by the sharp eyes of a 10-year-old princess whose curiosity about shadows had potentially saved lives. As the protection team moved into position and the true nature of the threat began to emerge, one thing was already clear. Princess Charlotte's remarkable observation skills had uncovered something that could have ended very differently if not for her question about shadows that didn't fall quite right in the afternoon sun. Detective Inspector Morrison approached the situation with the careful precision that had kept the royal family safe for over a decade. His team consisted of 8 highly trained protection officers, each positioned strategically around the gardens. They communicated through nearly invisible earpieces and subtle hand signals that looked like natural gestures to anyone watching. The man they were observing had now abandoned all pretense of working. He stood near a large oak tree, his back partially turned toward where Princess Charlotte and her mother sat on the stone bench. From his vantage point, he could see both the royal family and the main path leading back to the castle. His positioning was not coincidental. Officer Sarah Chun, a specialist in surveillance detection, had been watching the suspect through high-powered binoculars from her concealed position in one of the castle's upper windows. What she observed made her immediately radio Morrison with urgent information. "The subject is carrying," Chin's voice crackled quietly through Morrison's earpiece. "Right hip, concealed under the work jacket. Appears to be a significant weight pulling down that side of the garment. Also noting unusual bulges in the left jacket pocket that could be additional equipment." Morrison felt his jaw clench. An armed intruder within striking distance of the Princess of Wales and Princess Charlotte represented every protection officer's worst nightmare. The fact that this person had somehow infiltrated the grounds using the cover of a legitimate work crew suggested planning and resources that elevated this far beyond a lone disturbed individual. The 2 actual groundskeepers continued their leaf raking, completely oblivious to the drama unfolding around them. Morrison made the difficult decision to keep them in place for now. Moving them suddenly might alert the intruder that he had been discovered, potentially triggering whatever action he was planning to take. Catherine maintained her conversation with Charlotte, though every maternal instinct screamed at her to grab her daughter and run. Years of training in royal protocol during crisis situations had taught her that panic often created more danger than the initial threat. She needed to trust the protection officers to do their job while keeping Charlotte calm and unaware of the developing situation. "Mummy, the man is looking at us now," Charlotte observed matter-of-factly, as if commenting on the weather. "He keeps pretending to look at his tools, but his eyes are on us." Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice remained steady. "Sometimes people are curious about us, darling. It's nothing to worry about." Even as she spoke the reassuring words, Catherine was calculating distances, escape routes, and protective positions they could take if the situation deteriorated rapidly. Morrison received additional intelligence through his earpiece that changed everything. Officer David Kumar, who had been conducting a rapid background check on the work crew, had discovered that only 2 groundskeepers were scheduled to work in this section of the gardens today. The 3rd man was not supposed to be there at all. More disturbing still was Kumar's discovery that the real 3rd team member, groundskeeper William Hayes, had called in sick that morning, reporting a sudden case of food poisoning. Someone had taken Hayes' place, wearing his uniform, carrying his identification, and knowing enough about palace groundskeeping procedures to blend in with the legitimate workers until Princess Charlotte's sharp observation skills exposed the deception. The implications were staggering. This was not a crime of opportunity or a security breach caused by negligence. Someone had planned this carefully, waiting for Hayes to be unavailable and then stepping into his place with remarkable precision. The level of inside knowledge required suggested either significant surveillance of palace operations or, more troubling still, assistance from someone with authorized access. Morrison made the decision to move. He signaled to his team, and, like a carefully choreographed dance, they began to close the distance between themselves and the intruder. Each officer approached from a different angle, creating multiple lines of sight and preventing any single escape route. The suspicious man seemed to sense the change in atmosphere around him. His head lifted slightly, and his eyes began to scan the gardens more actively. Morrison could see him beginning to recognize that his presence had been detected. The man's right hand moved definitely toward whatever he was carrying under his jacket. Armed response authorized. Morrison spoke quietly into his radio. "Subject is reaching. Protection priority alpha." Catherine saw the subtle shift in the protection officer's movements and knew that whatever Charlotte had noticed was about to reach a critical moment. She stood smoothly, taking Charlotte's hand in what appeared to be a natural conclusion to their afternoon rest. "Shall we head back toward the castle, sweetheart?" Catherine asked, her tone perfectly casual despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "I think it's time for tea." But as they rose from the bench, the man near the oak tree abandoned all subtlety. He pulled something from beneath his jacket, and Morrison's worst fears were confirmed. The object in the man's hands was unmistakably a weapon, though from this distance Morrison could not determine exactly what type. "Down!" Morrison's voice cut through the afternoon air with commanding authority as he sprinted toward the royal family's position. "Protection! Get down now!" Catherine's training took over instantly. She pushed Charlotte toward the ground behind the stone bench, covering her daughter's body with her own while scanning for additional cover. The peaceful autumn afternoon exploded into controlled chaos as protection officers converged on the threat from multiple directions. Charlotte, confused and frightened by the sudden change from pleasant walk to emergency situation, pressed close to her mother. "Mummy, what's happening? Why is everyone running?" "Everything is going to be fine," Catherine whispered, though her eyes remained fixed on the unfolding situation. "The officers are just doing their job to keep us safe. Remember how you noticed something unusual about that man? You were absolutely right to tell me." The intruder found himself surrounded, but not yet captured. Morrison could see him calculating his options, weapon still in hand, looking for an escape route that did not exist. The man's eyes darted between the approaching officers and the royal family members taking cover behind the bench. Officer Chun had left her observation post in the castle and was approaching from the suspect's blind spot, moving with the silent efficiency of someone trained in close-quarters tactical response. Her role was to prevent the situation from escalating while giving the suspect an opportunity to surrender peacefully. "Armed police," Chun announced herself clearly. "Drop your weapon and place your hands where we can see them. You are surrounded, and there's no way out of the situation." The man turned toward Chin's voice, and Morrison got his first clear look at the weapon. It was not a gun as he had initially feared, but rather a long-range photography lens with what appeared to be additional electronic equipment attached. The relief Morrison felt was immediately replaced by a different kind of concern. If this was a surveillance operation rather than a direct attack, it suggested even more sophisticated planning and potentially broader implications for royal family security. The two legitimate groundskeepers had finally realized that something extraordinary was happening around them. They stood frozen with their rakes in hand, watching as armed police officers surrounded their supposed colleague. The expression on their faces showed complete shock and confusion as they began to understand that they had been working alongside an imposter. "This is not what it appears," the man called out, still holding the camera equipment. "I am documenting security vulnerabilities for a legitimate journalism investigation. I have press credentials." Morrison was not impressed by this claim. Press credentials do not authorize trespassing on royal property while impersonating palace staff. Drop the equipment and surrender immediately. Charlotte peeked around her mother's protective embrace, trying to understand what was happening to the man she had noticed because his shadow fell wrong. The scene before her was like something from a movie, with police officers and confusion and her mother holding her so tightly it was almost difficult to breathe. The standoff continued for several tense moments as the intruder seemed to weigh his options. Morrison could see him calculating whether he could somehow escape or complete whatever mission had brought him here. The afternoon sun continued to cast its revealing shadows, the same shadows that had exposed his presence to a 10-year-old princess whose curiosity about light and darkness had potentially prevented a major security incident. What none of them knew in that moment was that this man's capture would reveal a much larger conspiracy, one that reached deeper into palace operations than anyone had imagined possible. The man finally lowered his equipment and raised his hands, but Morrison could see in his eyes that this surrender was strategic rather than genuine. Years of experience had taught the detective inspector to recognize the difference between defeat and calculated retreat. This individual was buying time, perhaps hoping for extraction or simply looking for a better opportunity to complete his mission. "Move slowly," Morrison commanded, approaching with his weapon drawn, but pointed downward. Place the equipment on the ground and step away from it. As the suspect complied, Officer Chen moved in to secure the sophisticated camera gear. What she found was far more complex than a simple photography setup. The equipment included high-powered listening devices, signal interceptors, and what appeared to be a satellite communication system. This was not journalism equipment at all, but rather a mobile surveillance station capable of intercepting royal family communications and monitoring their security protocols in real time. Catherine remained crouched behind the stone bench with Charlotte, though she could now see that the immediate threat had been contained. Her daughter's breathing had steadied, but Charlotte's sharp eyes were still watching everything happening around them with the same intense observation skills that had initiated this entire incident. "Mummy," Charlotte whispered, "there are more people watching us from different places. I can see them moving behind the trees." Catherine felt ice water flow through her veins. If Charlotte was right, and she usually was about these things, then the man they had just apprehended might be only one part of a larger operation. She pressed the emergency button on her communication device again, this time using the code that indicated multiple threats. Morrison received Catherine's signal just as his own tactical awareness was reaching the same conclusion. The sophisticated equipment they had discovered suggested coordination and resources far beyond what a single operative could manage. His eyes began scanning the grounds with renewed intensity, looking for signs of additional surveillance or support personnel. Charlotte's observation proved accurate within moments. Officer Kumar, positioned near the castle's eastern wall, spotted movement among a grove of ancient yew trees that bordered the private gardens. Someone was there, watching the arrest through what appeared to be professional surveillance equipment. "Multiple contacts," Kumar's voice came through Morrison's earpiece. "East perimeter, approximately 200 meters from the royal family's position. At least 2 individuals with optical equipment, possibly more." The situation that had begun with a 10-year-old princess noticing incorrect shadows was rapidly evolving into something that resembled a coordinated intelligence operation against the British royal family. Morrison felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders as he realized they were dealing with something far more serious than a single intruder. The man they had captured was not talking, maintaining a stubborn silence, even when presented with evidence of his sophisticated surveillance equipment. His clothing had been searched, revealing false identification documents and communication devices that suggested professional training. This was not an amateur photographer or overzealous journalist, but someone with serious intelligence gathering capabilities. "Lock down the entire grounds," Morrison ordered through his radio. "Full perimeter sweep, all sections. We need to know who else is out there and how they got onto the property." Catherine could hear the controlled urgency in the officers' voices, and she knew that Charlotte's sharp observations had uncovered something much larger than a simple security breach. The fact that her daughter was still noticing details that trained security personnel were missing only reinforced Catherine's growing realization that Charlotte possessed genuinely exceptional situational awareness skills. Officer Chan had been examining the captured surveillance equipment and made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the entire security team. The devices were not just monitoring current royal family communications, but they had been recording and storing data for what appeared to be several weeks. Someone had been systematically gathering intelligence on royal family movements, security protocols, and private conversations. "Ma'am," Chen approached Morrison with a device in her hands. "This equipment has been active for approximately 3 weeks. They've been monitoring secure communications, tracking movement patterns, and recording private conversations. The data storage suggests they were building comprehensive intelligence profiles." Morrison felt sick. 3 weeks of surveillance meant that whoever was behind this operation had detailed knowledge of royal family schedules, security procedures, and personal habits. They would know when family members were most vulnerable, which routes they preferred, and how to exploit gaps in protection coverage. The search of the eastern perimeter confirmed Charlotte's observation about additional watchers. Kumar and his team found evidence of a sophisticated observation post hidden among the yew trees, complete with high-powered cameras, communications equipment, and detailed notes about royal family activities. The site showed signs of regular use over an extended period. More disturbing still was the discovery of a detailed floor plan of Windsor Castle's private apartments, marked with information that could only have come from someone with authorized access to restricted areas. The conspiracy was not just external surveillance, but included inside knowledge that suggested someone within the palace's trusted staff was providing information to hostile actors. Charlotte had remained remarkably calm throughout the unfolding drama, though Catherine could see her daughter processing everything she observed with the same careful attention that had started this entire incident. The princess was learning firsthand that her ability to notice unusual details was not just a childhood curiosity, but a skill that could have serious real-world implications. Princess Charlotte. Morrison approached them once the immediate area had been secured. Your observation about the shadows was absolutely correct, and it may have prevented something very serious from happening. You have remarkably sharp eyes. Charlotte looked up at the detective inspector with the solemn expression that sometimes appeared when she realized adults were treating her observations as genuinely important rather than mere childhood chatter. The shadows were wrong because he was standing differently than the other workers, she explained. They were bent over their work, but he was standing straight up, so the sun hit him from a different angle. Also, his tools were too clean, and he kept checking a watch, but gardeners don't need to know the exact time when they're just raking leaves. Morrison exchanged glances with Catherine. Charlotte had noticed details that even experienced security personnel had missed. Her natural observation skills, combined with a logical thinking that allowed her to analyze what she was seeing, represented a remarkable combination of talents. The investigation into the surveillance operation was just beginning, but already it was clear that Charlotte Sharp had uncovered something that could have had devastating consequences for royal family security. The data collected by the hostile surveillance team could have been used to plan attacks, kidnapping attempts, or other serious threats against members of the royal family. As the afternoon sun began to set over Windsor Castle, casting long shadows that now seemed ominous rather than peaceful, Catherine realized that her daughter had just played a crucial role in protecting their family from a threat they never saw coming. The question that remained was how deep this conspiracy went and who else might be involved in what appeared to be a sophisticated intelligence operation targeting the British royal family. The man they had captured was just the beginning. The real investigation was about to start, and Charlotte's observation about incorrect shadows had opened a window into something much darker than anyone had initially imagined. The investigation that followed Charlotte's discovery sent shockwaves through the highest levels of British security services. Within hours of the arrests, MI5 counterintelligence specialists arrived at Windsor Castle to take over what had clearly become a matter of national security rather than simple palace protection. Commander Elizabeth Hartwell, a veteran of 25 years in Royal Protection Services, found herself leading the most comprehensive security review in decades. The evidence collected from the surveillance operation revealed a conspiracy that reached deeper into palace operations than anyone had dared imagine possible. The captured operative, who had finally been identified as Anton Kruger, a former intelligence officer with connections to several hostile foreign services, had been recruited specifically for this operation because of his expertise in electronic surveillance and his ability to blend into civilian populations. His infiltration of the groundskeeping crew had been months in the planning, waiting for the perfect opportunity when the real William Hayes would be unavailable. But Kruger was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The investigation revealed that the surveillance operation had been gathering intelligence not just on the immediate royal family, but on their extended network of friends, staff members, and regular visitors to royal properties. Someone had been building a comprehensive map of everyone who had access to the royal family and how that access might be exploited. Charlotte had been invited to participate in a special briefing, her first ever involvement in a formal security discussion. Commander Hartwell wanted to understand exactly what the 10-year-old princess had observed and how her mind processed the details that had escaped trained security personnel. "Princess Charlotte," Commander Hartwell said gently, "can you tell me exactly what made you notice that the man's shadow was different?" Charlotte sat straight in her chair, taking the question seriously. When people are really working, their bodies move in certain ways, she explained. The other gardeners were bent over, focused on their raking. Their shadows were short and fat because the sun was hitting their backs while they leaned forward. But the third man was standing up straight, like he was watching rather than working. His shadow was longer and thinner because his body was in a different position. Commander Hartwell exchanged glances with Morrison. Charlotte's explanation revealed not just sharp observation skills, but an understanding of cause and effect that was remarkably sophisticated for someone her age. What else did you notice about him? Hartwell continued. His rake was backward, Charlotte said matter-of-factly. He was holding it like someone who had seen raking, but never actually done it. Also, his clothes were too new. The other gardeners had stains and worn patches where their clothes rubbed against tools and plants. His uniform looked like it came straight from shop. The investigation team was building a picture of just how much Charlotte had observed in those few minutes of watching the work crew. Her natural curiosity and attention to detail had picked up on numerous indicators that the man did not belong, any one of which should have been sufficient to alert security personnel. The analysis of the captured surveillance equipment revealed the true scope of the threat Charlotte had helped uncover. The operation had been collecting real-time intelligence on royal family movements for over a month, building detailed profiles of their habits, preferences, and security arrangements. This information could have been used to plan kidnapping attempts, assassination plots, or other serious attacks against members of the royal family. More troubling still was the discovery that the surveillance team had been planning to expand their operations. Documents found at the hidden observation post included plans for infiltrating other royal properties, installing permanent surveillance equipment in locations frequented by the royal family, and recruiting additional assets among palace staff members. The security review prompted by Charlotte's discovery led to the most comprehensive overhaul of royal protection protocols in modern history. Commander Hartwell's team identified dozens of potential vulnerabilities that had existed in plain sight, invisible to security personnel who had become too familiar with routine operations to notice subtle anomalies. New training programs were implemented that emphasized the kind of observational skills that Charlotte had demonstrated naturally. Security officers were taught to pay attention to shadows, body language, equipment positioning, and other subtle indicators that someone might not belong in their assigned role. Charlotte herself became something of a consultant to the security team, though in an informal capacity appropriate for her age. Her ability to notice details that others missed was recognized as a valuable asset that should be encouraged and developed rather than dismissed as childhood curiosity. The investigation also revealed the identity of the inside source who had been providing information to the hostile surveillance operation. James Whitmore, a palace maintenance supervisor with 20 years of trusted service, had been recruited through a combination of financial pressure and blackmail. His access to work schedules, security protocols, and staff assignments had made the sophisticated surveillance operation possible. Whitmore's betrayal sent shockwaves through the palace community, where trust and loyalty were considered fundamental requirements for anyone with access to the royal family. His arrest and the subsequent security investigation led to enhanced background checks and monitoring systems designed to detect staff members who might be vulnerable to recruitment by hostile actors. The Foreign Intelligence Service behind the operation was eventually identified through analysis of the surveillance equipment and communication protocols used by the arrested operatives. The revelation that a hostile nation had mounted such an extensive intelligence-gathering operation against the British royal family prompted diplomatic responses at the highest levels of government. Princess Charlotte's role in uncovering this conspiracy became a closely guarded secret, known only to the immediate security team and senior palace officials. The decision was made to protect her privacy and ensure that her remarkable observation skills did not make her a target for future intelligence operations. However, within palace security circles, Charlotte's sharp eye for detail became legendary. Her ability to notice that a man's shadow fell at the wrong angle had prevented what could have been a catastrophic security breach, and her natural observational skills were recognized as an asset that should be cherished and protected. The afternoon walk that had begun as a simple mother-daughter stroll through the palace gardens had evolved into a masterclass in situational awareness and threat detection. Charlotte's innocent question about shadows had unraveled a sophisticated intelligence operation and led to the most comprehensive security review in royal protection history. Commander Hartwell concluded her investigation report with a recommendation that would have seemed impossible before that October afternoon: that the royal family's own powers of observation, particularly those demonstrated by Princess Charlotte, should be considered an integral part of the overall security framework protecting the monarchy. The 10-year-old princess who had noticed that shadows fell wrong had proven that sometimes the most effective security measures come not from technology or training, but from the simple human ability to pay attention to the world around us and ask questions when something does not seem quite right. The ancient walls of Windsor Castle had witnessed many threats over the centuries, from medieval armies to modern terrorists. But perhaps none had been detected and neutralized through such an unexpected combination of childhood curiosity and sharp observational skills. Princess Charlotte's legacy was already being written in the security protocols designed to protect future generations of the royal family, all because she had the courage to ask why one man's shadow was different from everyone else's.